Right, so after you've moved the transmission tunnel and all the plastics around the front here, it's time to take off the plastic cover. There are two different length bolts, that bolt there, which is the same as all the ones around the top, and then two short bolts in the bottom here. Don't mix them up, don't put a long one in there, you'll damage the clutch cage. 8mm spanner, and off they come. Right, so once you've got all the bolts out, you need to take the coolant hose, push it away, and underneath this mounting bracket, that gives you space to get your cover off. You of course can do this without removing any of the plastics in the front here, but for the sake of doing this correctly, I've removed them all. In the field, you can leave this all on, and you can take this cover off through the seat well without needing to take those plastics off. Needs a little bit of manipulation, but it's possible. Okay, so now what you do is you take the cover off. And you get it out. Ah, there's one more bolt left in here. There's always one sneaky bolt. Right. Okay, take the bolt out. Cover comes off. Lift this O-ring, drop it down to the bottom here, twist it. Just going to manipulate it a little bit to get it out. This is entirely possible. There we go. Once you manipulate it past the hose at the bottom, there you go. Transmission cover is out and your O-ring is out. Once again, this is a 10mm socket, and there are two different length bolts. The one at the back and the one at the bottom here are longer than this top one and the rear bottom. Don't swap them around. If you do, you'll crack your crankcase. So take those out, and then okay, so now that you've got all the bolts out, you've got to get this clutch cage off. Sometimes it just pops off, and there are other times when you actually need to give it a helping hand, and this looks like one of those times where you're going to need to pry it off. If you're going to go the prying route with a pry bar, just be very, very gentle how you do it. Make sure that the bolts are completely out. Should really just pop off. It's a little bit of hassle. It can jam a little. I've noticed this in the past, that these clutch cages jam because they don't have a bearing in the center shaft. They've got a bush that, if you don't quite get it in the right angle, it sits inside that bush and you can't extract it, which can be challenging if you're going to do a belt change in the field. If you break a belt while you're out on a trail somewhere, this part of the exercise could be seriously frustrating. Right, so now you pop the clutch cage off, take it out gently, bit of an art form to that. Right, and that's out. Okay. Now, every book you'll read, every online forum you'll read, will tell you to take one of these bolts from the clutch cage and thread it into one of these holes here to split the sheaves. However, I've found that they are not nearly long enough. If you take a normal M6 by about 40mm, put it in, all four of them in this face is threaded, unlike the Rhino that's only got two of them threaded. Take it, take a M10 socket and tighten it up. And as you tighten it up, you'll feel it bite on the opposite sheave. And if you have a look over here, you'll see the belt start slackening off as the sheaves open up. It starts to get rather tight, so you need to substitute the driver for a socket. Open them as wide as you can. I like to go the full 40mm bolt. That gives me enough play to move the belt around and get it off comfortably. Now, before you go ahead and change your belts, it's very, very wise to clean the sheaves. That's what I'm going to be doing with this one. So, you take your belt, work it off the top of that sheave. It's a little tricky, you've got to get it out, and you just keep spinning it, and there you go. Pop it off and pop it out. There you go, belt is out. And now what you need to do, if you have a look inside these sheaves, they're quite dirty. They've got a black face, that one as well. Secondary's got a black face, and that's contaminants from the old belt. So before you put a new belt on and run it, you need to clean those up. And how you do that is quite simple. You use a piece of Scotch-Brite pad, just a small little sliver of Scotch-Brite, rub the sheaves, get them all nice and shiny again. It also roughens up the surfaces and gives it a bit of a bedding face to work with. And then you wash it all down with some acetone, allow it to evaporate, and then you put the new belt on. So I'm going to do that quick, and then I'll show you how to assemble the new belt. So here we are rubbing the secondary sheave with some Scotch-Brite pad. You can use steel wool or some 1000 grit sandpaper, water paper if you want. Scotch-Brite works quite nicely. And this is just to take off all the old rubber contaminants and bits of fiber from the old belt. This belt that's been taken off here has done 2070 kilometers. It's still in good condition, it's still within the spec, but I bought a Gates G-Force, and I just want to change the belt over just for peace of mind, as well as knowing what belt has been in there, and knowing how it's been put through its paces since I never bought this machine new. I purchased it second hand with 1,200 kilometers on the clock, and I don't quite know how the previous owner drove it, which I suspect they drove it quite hard, looking at some of the other parts that I've had to change on the machine. So now you just take acetone soaked rag and give it a wipe, get everything out, get it nice and clean. Do the other side. We've already done the primary. Yep, there it is. Nice thing about acetone is it dries off very quickly, and you can start working again straight away. Okay, so now that we've got that clean, take our new belt. It's a Gates G-Force, as you can see there. It's a 29G3596 carbon Kevlar reinforced belt. Now, it's advisable when you install a Gates belt that you install it with the writing facing you so that you can read it. And you just feed the belt in like that. Damn, feeding a belt on is a little bit trickier. See, with most of the OEM belts, they have a rotational direction that you've got to maintain. It's not the case with the Gates belt. Gates is omnidirectional. However, Gates recommend that you install it such that you can read it for like that. There you go. It's on. So if you have a look at the writing, reading it, Gates G4 is 293596. Okay. Why they do that? It's also so that you know when you come to, if you ever come to clean your CVT at a future date, you take your belt off. It must always go back on in the same orientation because it's going to wear on each face differently to that. And if you turn it around, you're going to have slippage, heat, and belt breakage. Right. So now what you do is you loosen up the nut in this secondary sheave, which will then close that sheave and allow it to grip the belt. So here we go. Take this out. And as you can notice on the top, you watch the sheave. It starts to close. On the belt. It'll soon start gripping on the belt. There we go. Starting to grip. There we go. It's gripped on the belt. Now there you go. The bolt is loose, and you can take it out completely. Now all that's left to do is assemble the clutch cage and start the motor and give it a bit of a run so that we can get this belt into position. We can almost do it by hand if you feed it around, and if you're careful enough you can sort of get the sheave to be back to its original position, but not entirely. You see the belts are still loose there. I strongly recommend using some LM47 liquid moly grease inside this little bearing bush housing. Give it a generous sort of squirt inside there. Seeing as it's not a bearing and it's running at high speed, I always think it's a good idea to sort of lubricate it a bit. Right, now we take this cage and we have to position it back in where it came from. So here we go. Put the camera in here so one can see where we're going. Right, so back in here. This is a little tricky. Sort of get into place here as we go along. Right, there we go. Clutch cage in place. Get it the right way around, make sure you've done that, and there we go. Clutch cage seated. Put the bolts back in, and we're ready to give it a run. Okay, so now we've got the clutch cage back in place and everything in place. What we need to do is we need to just start it up and get the belt to tension up. So right, okay, so what we're going to do now is just start the engine and allow the belt to tension and take up its position. Look now, the belt's tight, nice and tight, and the sheaves gripped completely up in the right places. And there you go. That's the belt installation. Sorted, done and dusted. Now all that's left is to put all the covers back on, close it up and take it for a spin. And make sure that you bed it in, follow the instructions in the manual, do the 30 miles or 50 kilometers of easy riding to get the belt to bed in nicely onto the sheaves, get all the edges gripping nicely before you go and do anything serious. Improves the belt wear, and Gates guarantee around 6,000 kilometers out of their belts if you bed it in correctly in the beginning.